Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, Peter, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Quick question. Um, you had sent initially some questions and then some subsequent questions, and you made a comment that they will supersede many on the stock list I sent. So the word stock confused me. Were those questions that did not come from the members, but they were somehow some list you found somewhere, or because I found
Holy
the other
shit,
list certainly
that's
very
fast.
interesting?
Yeah,
Hang on, Jeff. Let me get online. Let me get online.
all right, I'm talking to Peter for a minute, so hold on, Joe.
Yeah, okay.
To answer your question, Peter, the stock questions were the first ones I sent you, which are just questions that I might use with anybody.
Okay, when you say stock, they're questions that you came up with
Correct.
for just that, because some of them were very good. So maybe we can go to those if we get through the other ones.
I do want to go through, I mean, I've highlighted 5 of them that I think I'd like to go over, and we'll do it in a sequence that makes sense. I think first I'll introduce you, and then I'd like to ask you just to give the group background on yourself. Of course, that will be better than I can put together. And then we can go to the Q&A questions.
It's your meeting, so that's fine. I'll let you run it.
Yeah, well, I think we can get through most of these questions because it depends, on how much depth we get into all of them. But
Sure.
let me find my other notes here. I sent you one last question today. I don't know if you received it about B&O and their new 4000 series, or the Renaissance of the
Right. I did not get it. So just
Okay.
throw it at me at the appropriate moment.
Sure. All right. Let me see. I'm going to try to, while Joe's signing on, because he's a little more technically adept, because I want to give you the option to screen share if you wish. And I don't know how to do that. Joe's going to help.
Just got to get my camera pedestal, which is going to be what today? What are we going to use for a pedestal? Oh, yeah. Last time I used this. There we go.
How is the COVID down in your state?
Supposedly getting better, but I think we're kind of in the same boat. It got bad. We let down our guard. It got bad, and then we closed things down again, and it got better. So I think we're on the getting better side.
I hope so.
Where you are?
New York was very good. Governor Cuomo was roundly criticized outside of, from Washington, but he did a great job. We were very strict in New York. The numbers were obviously horrible. We were a real hotspot way back in the beginning. So he did the right thing. And now it's picking back up in certain areas of New York where certain groups are congregating as they should not be doing. So, it's typical human nature that, one of my favorite quotes is from Einstein, who, when he was interviewed by a newspaper reporter, he said, "Dr. Einstein, can you explain infinity?" And to have been a fly on the wall. So he responded to the newspaper reporter. He said, forgive the poor impersonation, he said, "Well, there are only 2 things that are infinite. One of them is the universe, and the other one is human stupidity. And I'm not so sure about the universe."
Oh, that is funny.
It is funny and true.
Yeah. I don't know if he was just referring to the person asking that question, or.
No, I'm pretty sure it was a general statement after what he'd been through. So.
Yeah, very interesting fellow. He had some funny statements I've heard through the years that were very good. If you ever could get someone like him and Mark Twain together, it probably would have been quite
Oh,
something.
Mark Twain. Mark Twain said 99% of the world is comprised of fools, and the remaining 1% lies in great danger.
Yeah, he was a very clever guy.
I actually performed an impersonation of him in my youth in a show.
Oh, well, give us a little bit of that if you can
I had a
recall.
lot of it memorized.
I bet
He
you
said,
do.
actually, the show I did, the person who was supposed to MC the show got stage fright and didn't show up. So I had the full white, suit and the white hair and the big white mustache and the cigar. And when I got there, the guy said to me, well, you can't do your routine. The MC didn't show up. You got to break up your routine and introduce all the acts. And I went, oh my God. So I did my best. But the opening one was, and I stole the voice from Hal Holbrook, who had taken it from a short recording of Twain that Edison had done. So he got to hear how Twain spoke. So Mark Twain said, he said, well, I was once introduced to an audience about this size by a lawyer. Kept his hands in his pockets. He introduced me as Mark Twain, a humorist, a man who was really funny, a rare creature indeed. Well, I was struck speechless by this complimentary thunderbolt. Never had I heard a compliment so beautifully phrased or so well deserved. But we had a rare creature in our midst and a humorist who was really funny. We had a lawyer who kept his hands in his own. So that was the introduction.
What was it cut out right when you said in his own, was it pockets?
In pockets, right? Because it started was I was introduced to an audience about the size by a lawyer, kept his hands in his pockets.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, very, very well done. Well, Joe, what do we need to do to give Peter, before I go any further,
Here, let's do a run through right now.
Ledermann, the correct way to pronounce your last name? Or
Well, east of the Mississippi or west of the Mississippi?
it doesn't matter. Whatever way you like it.
Letterman is fine.
Ledermann.
Is fine.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Soft.
I was going to try a quick share screen.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so it says host disabled participant share screen.
I'm gonna fix that right now.
All right.
I'm
I'm
gonna
going
fix
to
it
click
for
off.
you right now. There we go. You should be able to share screen now.
All right, because one of the questions involves, let's see if this works. Right, okay, and can you all see that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Very good, all right.
Good. Well, I'm
Good.
glad you're familiar with this process, Peter. Have you been doing these for other organizations like ours around the country?
Yeah, I have, but I also do a fair amount of Zoom meetings with other folks, so I have a passing familiarity with it.
Okay, well, that's good. We did the first one in April and no one was very familiar with it. That was with
Especially Jeff, just saying.
Yeah, especially me. And well, Nelson's audio it was very, very hard to hear him. And I don't know why the issue, I don't think he had his computer set correctly, but even people that are good with electronics don't know how to do it. So that's my excuse.
Well, I'm running on a cell phone here for my internet.
That's actually pretty good though, Peter. It's as far as any jitter and stuff, it's very rare. It's smooth.
Yeah, I'm just doing a speed test now because placement of the phone is critical. It's not too bad. I'm doing 11.5 down and 12.5 up or 10 up. And yeah, we can't get internet where we are here.
Where are you?
Sort of grandfathered AT&T hotspots.
Hi,
See,
Jeff.
now it says my internet connection is unstable. Am I cutting out now?
You did.
Well,
You did for a few seconds.
Okay, so
I've joined.
I
Can
could
anybody
take
hear
the
me?
phone and put it in another spot. In fact, I'm gonna go do that. Let's see how that works.
Sure.
Let's see if that gives me
Yeah.
higher speed. I'll be right back with you.
Do some experimenting. That's great. Thank you. I
Jeff,
better go.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can, John. I don't see you, but I hear you.
I don't think I'm visual here.
No,
Maybe I am.
there should be a button that says start video on the lower left.
Oh, yes. There I am. Looking very magenta.
Stay. Stay. Stay.
So how's the weather out in Arizona?
Yeah, it's still hot. I was up working in this stuff yesterday, John, up
Yeah.
north. Actually, it was nice. We were working up north in the Prescott Valley area, so we had a nice breeze where we were.
Nice.
And because all week I'd been working in the metro area outside, and it, again, being from Canada, it can be 120 degrees outside, and I just put a positive spin. It could be minus 40 with the wind chill.
Yeah, I lived up north for a while. I live in Nashville now.
Yeah.
So things are rainy here because of Delta.
Yeah.
Oh, you're getting that?
Just a little bit. It's not really a big deal. It's just some rain. Tonight we're supposed to get thunderstorms, but I don't think we're going to get much in the way of wind. Maybe 25-mile-an-hour gusts. We're used to that kind of thing. Tornadoes are the things here that really get us cranked
Yeah,
up.
get you crazy. I
Mhm.
bet you will get to take advantage of a lot of live music living in Nashville.
Not right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're screaming
Normal.
about it. They're doing a lot of things online, concerts online. Some people are going out to drive-in theaters, and they're performing in front of the screen, and then everybody drives in and has their FM radio tuned into the broadcast. But they also have the speakers out there, and they do some concerts. But yeah, it's a horrible thing for musicians right now.
Yeah,
Really terrible.
I imagine that and the music industry in general is probably not doing so well.
Yeah, I mean, everything changed when it went from physical inventory to digital, and so I still think people are downloading, but people aren't going to record stores now. I mean, it's, I've got friends at record stores, and some of them are doing okay, and a lot of them are really, really suffering right now.
Yeah, I think Record Day was good here the second Record Day.
Yeah, we got another one here,
I forget when it is.
the 24th.
Oh, okay, good.
So 2 weeks.
Very good. So are you mostly a vinyl guy, or what's your preference personally?
Well, I started in the music business in 1994 after being in private business for 20 years. And I was in distribution. I started with Rounder Distribution for Rounder Records and about 300 labels, independents, no majors, and worked my way up, excuse me, until about 2000 when everything started going away for physical, because we were in distribution of hard product. And I had moved around to a few other companies, but notably I was selling things like Grateful Dead records and Ryko Disc, Rounder Records, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary this week. I was proud to be with those folks, bunch of hippies. And so that was my background in the music business, but also I've been a musician since I was 18, playing bluegrass and country and rock and
Wow.
things like that. Just a weekend warrior,
How did you come to meet Dieter?
We met at the University of Oklahoma in 1969.
That's the year I was born. Just making you guys, feel
Oh,
old.
thanks so much.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Oh, that makes me feel just old. But yeah, we've been friends for 51 years, and I retired from what I was doing. I was actually, after I got out of the music business, I went into finance, and then 2008 came around, and I was just a rookie, and everything went to the corner offices when everything crashed. So I decided to get back and do something I had done as a hobby, which was be a Weight Watcher leader. And I did that for over 11 years here in Middle Tennessee, because we don't have any problem finding people who want to lose weight here in Middle Tennessee. Home of the meat and three, if anybody knows what a meat and three is.
Meat.
Meat and three. So it's a meat like turkey, beef, chicken, and three sides. So the three sides are vegetables. So when I got down here, I went to my first meet and three, and I was so happy to see that French fries were considered a vegetable down here. That just made my day. And it also made me heavy. So I was a Weight Watcher leader for 11 and a half years, had 16 meetings a week. And then I retired from that. A week later, Peter called me up and says, I need an international sales director and marketing director, and you're it. And what am I going to do? Like refuse?
No, you're
So I'm rather new to the audio world. I mean, I've been here since last September, so it's been a year plus.
He's not new to the music world, obviously, but he is.
No. Got plenty of.
But he doesn't have a technical background. But the thing that John has, the famous writer Emerson. One of my favorite quotes is from Emerson. He said, "What you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying."
Yeah,
And a salesman never sells what he sells. He always sells who he is. And I've been called the worst salesman in the world. All right, puppy, you have to stay down. So, John is one of the most likable people I know. He won't talk about it, but he's had a rough life, and he's like a cork. There are some people that are just unsinkable, and John is one of them. He just refused to wear his hardship on his sleeve and the rough things that happened to him, and he just rose above them. And not many people do that. So that comes across when you meet him, when he talks to people. He's, that to me is what makes a good salesman, somebody you don't feel like, running away from. So,
yes.
Well, my wife would argue with you on that.
Your wife? I'm not talking about.
She might argue with you on that.
I'm not talking about Susie.
Okay. Well,
I switched to a different Wi-Fi system. Hopefully this will be better. We have a lot of challenge getting Wi-Fi here. We're too far for cable, and can't get fiber optic. We're way out in the woods here, so I'm using a cell phone service. So,
Joe, is it reading pretty good now?
Yeah, no, it's fine. He's fine. I mean, Peter, I know what it's like because up in Canada, we lived out in the sticks south of Ottawa, and we started off with satellite internet. From that, the cell tower went to LTE. I managed to make a deal with the devil with the local wireless company. And then finally, the big orange pipe showed up at my son's school, and I knew, hey, we're going to get DSL. So I feel your pain, sir.
yeah, it's hard. The cable company wanted $20,000 to run a cable here.
Yeah.
You got to be kidding. So I ran on AT&T hotspots, those old Netgear hotspots with grandfathered AT&T unlimited service, which they fortunately didn't throttle beyond 22 gig. And but they love to throw you off those services. So now there's a new one from Visible, which is a branch of Verizon, and it's been phenomenal. I bought 4 phones. You partner them, and it goes down to $25 a month. You've got unlimited data, and for people that can't get internet, if you can pick up enough signal, it's a godsend. So we do about anywhere from 10 to 20 MIPS. It's plenty good enough for downloading, Prime and TV and Zoom meetings. So we're just really happy about finding what looks like a solution.
Peter, where exactly are you located right now?
I'm in Martha's Vineyard,
Okay, so you would think Martha would qualify as a place that they'd bring some good service to.
Well, there is good service on the island. There's a lot of wealthy people here. I'm not one of them. Where we are, though, my wife, 12 years ago, and I were brought here. There was a company, a video company, a small video company on the island here. That's how I got involved or wanted to start Direct Graces, through knowing them. And we just fell in love with the place. And she was looking for a place to retire. And we got shown around to a bunch of charmless places here for 3 times what they cost elsewhere. And finally, when the realtor saw that we weren't terribly thrilled, he said, there is a white elephant. So he showed us a property that was 8 acres inside of 80 acres of protected land. And it was an old non-winterized farmhouse and a cottage on the property from the 1700s. And we came on the property and just fell in love. And my wife had a family member pass and a trust broke. So 8 years ago, she was able to build this house. So we just built a studio down the hill a bit. There was the cottage we rebuilt. The studio was just down the hill. It's 2,800 square feet above, and she's got an art studio in there. And I've got a laboratory underneath. So eventually when I retire, I will be working in that laboratory full time.
Well, Peter, I saw a YouTube interview with you. I think it was Michael Fremer. Did he go through your facility and do a video?
Art Dudley.
Art Dudley.
Before he
Okay.
passed away. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it was older then, but it was about 20 or 30 minutes long, and that facility looked rather large. Where's that facility?
Yeah, that's where my company is. It's in Peekskill. We're in northern Westchester, and we have 3 suites, and it's a total of almost 9,000 square feet.
Yeah, that's what it looked like. How many people are working for you then?
I'm sorry?
How many folks are employed there?
13.
Oh, that's a lot of space. Okay, well, let's see. We're 1 minute to start. So I'd like to give people a little bit of extra time to get signed in. Let's see. And there
Seems
were,
fine, Jeff. You're the guy, remember?
yeah. Well, I've changed my style a little bit just to give people a minute to come in, but we may just get going here anyway. Okay, can everyone hear? We'd like to ask you, if you're not part of it, just to mute your microphone. I think I see 1 or 2 that aren't muted yet, so we don't get too many extra dog noises in the background.
I've got a dog.
Oh, yeah, I do too. So, we'll probably get some dog noise. All right. So today we're blessed to have Mr. Peter Ledermann joining us. And for those of you who don't know, he's the founder of Soundsmith. I'm going to let Peter give you his main history because he knows it better. But what I read online, he talked about starting in '69 as a high-end audio repair, and that he's taught engineering and done that continuously for the past 47 years. So his philosophy, the best way to for engineering to study, the best way to learn engineering is to study the forensics of failure, which makes perfect sense. And actually, that's the same background that Nelson Pass had in his upbringing, and it certainly served him well. So that's an interesting commonality there. And then you worked in '76 for Bozak Corporation, which those were the speakers my parents had when I grew up, and I know them well. Moved in 1980 to IBM in the Research Center think tank. And obviously they don't invite people there who haven't got double dome capabilities. The primary inventor of 11 IBM patents. In '91, left IBM to pursue Soundsmith effort full-time. He's continued to teach in audio engineering through service design, developed his own line of speakers, amplifiers, preamplifiers, and continue to develop new ideas for cartridges. So he's worked with B&O, Bang & Olufsen, and creating their tooling and expertise for their cartridges, because they don't do it anymore, I understand. And from there, I'm going to let Peter talk about, give the rest of the background that I may have messed up on himself. So Peter.
Yeah, no, you did very, very well. I think the only person you left out was I worked with Richard Majestic at Ram Audio. People confuse him with Roger Majeski and his Ram Audio, but this was Richard Majestic, who worked at Brookhaven Labs and then worked at CM Laboratories, which was in Norwalk, Connecticut, and was their head of engineer. He left CM and founded Ram Audio in Danbury. And I left my service shop in White Plains at Audio Experts, where I had worked for a long time. I had my own business in their retail store, and went to work for Richard, mentored under him. And he was a great teacher, a great engineer. I learned a great deal working under him. So I worked for him for 3 years. 3.5 years. Then I was offered a position at Bozak. I became director of engineering of Bozak on my second day of employ, and that was getting thrown in the deep end of the pool in a lot of ways. But life is like that. I think nobody's ever prepared for the job that they receive until after they're in it for a long time. And then the Peter principle applies, where you rise to your eventual level of incompetence, if I remember the Peter principle. So I worked at Bozak for about 3 years and had a small hiatus, and then had an offer at IBM Research, where I worked for 11 years. But I maintained Soundsmith since 1970 as a mentoring company. I run it primarily as a teaching company. But I'm very grateful to have known a lot of people in audio: Saul Morantz, Sid Smith, Gordon Gow, the list goes on and on. When I went to high school in New Rochelle, I used to manage rock and roll bands, and one of the guitarists was Steve Hirsch. His father was Julian Hirsch, if any of you remember Hirsch-Hauck Laboratories. So I got to work in Hirsch's laboratory in the basement with his son Steve quite a bit last 2 years of high school. So that's basically it. Soundsmith has been a joy to operate for nearly 50 years. I think it's just about 50 years, because it's a dying industry. We can replace consumers, but the engineers have not been replaced, and that's a shame, because in 10 years they'll pretty much all be gone. Legacy engineers, people like Renee Yeager, who's been a good friend, who was head of DVX, Lexicon, HD, invented HD-CD, the list goes on and on. Renee is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in audio, and Richard Majestic, and of course, Jeff Rowland, who I'm friends with, and others. These people are all going to be gone in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's the real crime. And so that's one of the reasons I was very motivated to run Soundsmith, not so much as a profitable company, but as a mentoring company. And a few of the people I've taught have stayed in audio. Jeff Joseph was one of my students. Joseph
really?
Audio. Yeah, he used to laughingly say other mothers were bringing their kids for piano lessons, and his mother used to drop them off at my house for electronics lessons. So, I'm very happy that a lot of the young people that I trained, a percentage of them stayed in audio, because even though it is a drop in the bucket, I felt I really had to give something back to the field that I've loved since I was 3 years old. And
That must have been when you started, because you don't look that old, Peter.
it's the formaldehyde's doing a hell of a job on the outside. I should point out, it's not the year the car was made, it's the mileage on the car. So just keep that in mind. You have to lie down, Azul. Lie down. Lie
Peter,
down.
can you tell us a little bit about your charity organization, the Rescue?
Sure, Direct Race. Direct Race, thank you. Direct Race Records is something I was really very motivated to start. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and when you're raised in that environment, you become grateful for the air you breathe. I became aware of the fact that there are 215 million children in the world in severe forms of slave labor. And I don't mean just servitude, I mean severe forms of slave labor where if they're injured or get killed, it's meaningless. And they frankly would be better off dead than live the lives that they live. They're chained to machines, they're sold as sex slaves, they work in quarries with no protection. I mean, the list just goes. They're lured out to shrimp platforms in Jakarta, promise to be paid, and when they complain, they get clubbed over the head and thrown in the ocean. The list just goes on and on and on. And I became aware of them through our friends here in the vineyard at Galen Films, Len and Georgia Morris, incredibly brave people, and my friend who's now passed away, Roberto Romano, was an incredible photographer and cinematographer. These people spent their lives documenting child slave labor and slave trade around the world in children. So I wanted to do something, and I started to wonder. And I have to say, there was really remarkable divine intervention. I normally say I only require 3 proofs of God. One of them is 100% Kona coffee. The second one would be cheese. And the third one would be dogs. And to see people who've really sacrificed their lives and their well-being and risked their lives to rescue children is just a remarkable thing. And I was very motivated. When I started Direct Race, there was all kinds of divine intervention. The gentleman who owned True Tone Records, he came into our room at the New York Audio Show and he looked puzzled and he said, you know, I'm supposed to be here. I don't know why I'm here. Carl Rawati, whose initials are on the end of half the vinyl in the world. And he handed me his card and I said, oh my God, Mr. Rawati, I said, you are supposed to be here. Let me explain why. And when I told him, he just said, anything you need, it's yours. I had engineers show up at Soundsmith, recording engineers saying, I don't know why I'm supposed to be here. And the whole thing was like Field of Dreams. It was so strange. So I wound up buying 2 Neumann lathes from Carl Rawati because 30 days after I met him, Sony came in and bought his studio up at the top of the penthouse that he'd owned up at the top of the building in New York City. And he semi-retired and he sold me 2 lathes. And so we decided to start a direct-to-disc record label and all the proceeds go to rescue children. So
and the list of records is on your website. Where do people find the music?
Yeah, and we're sold out of a bunch of them. I'm hoping to go into repress of some. We have, the website is directgrace.org. And
put that on the chat board.
Yeah, directgrace.org, and you can buy the records right on the website. And we're going to go into repress of some, and it's just a wonderful project. I wish I could devote myself full time to it. What we really need is an executive director. That would be lovely. And there are enough people retired who are well off enough that they would have time to direct. What we really need is to build up the label with artists who are interested. We've had Bill Frisell come and record for us. John Poussette Dart, who's become a very close friend. In fact, we're going to be releasing 4 albums. Again, some divine intervention because Universal doesn't release material. We had an amazing experience with them. It literally was like divine intervention. And we got the recordings of the first 4 of John's albums, and we're going to be releasing those as half-speed masters, maybe 45. So we're very excited about that. We're going to do a box set with that. So that's coming soon with Direct.
Good for you.
That's
so
very exciting.
Is there, I mean, have you raised a lot of money, or is there something you can share in that line, or is it just getting started?
No, it's been, again, I unfortunately there are only 38 hours in a day, and there's just, and there are only 8 days in a week. So I wish I could devote a lot more time to Direct Grace. We just sort of wait until divine intervention intercedes and musicians are directed to us. We obviously want to focus on making records we can sell. So we want to work with people who are fairly well known. I think if we could get a couple of more people that are well known involved, I think it would be more viral, and more well-known musicians would be willing. You know, we've talked with people who are very well known. It's just really hard to get over that wall. That's why it requires an executive director to really pound the pavement and be polite and do the right things. You know, there's so much music from people that's in the can, recording sessions and jam sessions and so on. Never going to serve anyone, never going to help anyone. And if we could get to those musicians and say, listen, we'd love to make some audiophile recordings from stuff that's in the can that's never going to be used, and you can use it to rescue children. And
Who's going to say no to that?
well, people have said yes, but then they don't follow through. And I'm not going to name the musicians who've said yes and don't follow through, but they've got busy lives. You know, I get that, but you know, it's no skin off their teeth, and it's a shame. I really, what Direct Race needs is someone who can really do that. A real excellent executive director who's got the right creds, got the right communication skills, who's aggressive politely, to make Direct Race grow into the giving, the philanthropic record company that I hoped it, or I still hope it will be one day, instead of my just, you know, feeding it financially to keep it alive and then donating the money indirectly, you know, to the children. So,
Well, I certainly can't think of a more worthwhile endeavor than that. And yeah, that's that. Well, maybe we can think of somebody to send your way for that. But at this point, I'm going to just go through with everybody who's here now what we plan to do. I'm going to run through the questions. And if you have things you want to add, please write them into the chat section, and I'll read them off to Peter as we go along in between the other questions that we already have set up. We have several questions from people already submitted, so we're certainly going to use those. And then at the end, we'll have a little, you know, mic off Q&A time where people can ask other things or just chat with Peter. So to begin with, oh, here's a good question. This was from Paul Hombra. Do you think today's younger generation of kids have the same enthusiasm for electronic invention as they did when you were growing up?
I think it's a really good question. The answer is yes and no. Just like audio engineers were, I shouldn't say audio engineers, just like analog engineers were plentiful in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Towards the 60s, there were so many other fields that came up that started to dismantle audio. There was obviously digital engineering software that started in the 60s. Medical electronics, avionics, military electronics, you know, the list went on and on. So a lot of people that would have gone, might have gone into audio. Mind you, you can't get a degree in it. You have to go mentor somewhere or be self-taught. All those people got siphoned off. I think a lot of young people today that are interested or might have been interested in electronics have really been siphoned off into other things, whether it's video games or digital engineering or software. So I don't think there's quite the interest in hardware that there used to be. And there certainly aren't the kind of companies that used to provide kits like there used to be. I've seen some fledgling companies produce some kits, and you can still find some things online, but I don't think there's many young people directed in that direction, nor is there the availability of things to really get them psyched, get them really interested in electronics, as there used to be. You know, when I was 3 and 4 years old, I was given an electronic kit. You could build all kinds of things, and I was, you know, thrilled. I don't think those kinds of things are made available to young people. I think they're distracted by a lot of other things these days. So I don't know if that answers the question appropriately, but
I think it's a very accurate answer. I agree with you. Let me ask you a simple question. What attracted you to the audio world initially? Was it those 3 and 4 year old gifts your parents gave you, assembly toys, or were your parents musicians?
my father was a concert level violinist, although that's not what he did for a living. He had his German law degree, but he fled Nazi Germany, as did my mother, and they met here. But both parents had a deep interest in music. For myself, I had a deep interest in everything. I mean, from as far back as I can remember. Materials, science, animals, plants, the natural world, um, absolutely everything. And in terms of audio, I remember getting a little crystal microphone in a plastic box you had to assemble, and I threw the antenna wire out my third-story window. I was about 3 years old. I attached it to the grapevine. I filed down through the radiator to get a ground, and I followed the pictorial. And I sat there in bed with the earpiece wedged in my ear, just being so amazed that this device, without any batteries, without any power source, would run from some invisible energy that had been pushed out from some other place. And that, I had a recorder, I had a miniature tape recorder, you know, when I was about 4. And I mean, to me, capturing something as fluid as sound was magical. You know, it was like having lightning bugs in a jar and studying them. It was completely magical, capturing this energy and being able to reproduce it. I had a wind up when I was 3 years old, a luggable, but I couldn't drag it. And I was stunned. And the thing was, I played this thing enough. I used to have operatic records and so on, that I got it. You know, I understood that what Edison had done is he'd created an acoustic fulcrum. You know, he understood that if you pivoted at the right place, that a large force over a small area at the stylus at this end could be translated to a small force over a large area at the other end. So it was a mechanical impedance coupler or transfer device, an acoustic fulcrum or teeter-totter. And of course it worked in both directions. You could yell in this end and move the needle enough to cut the medium. And I remember getting it intuitively when I was probably 3 years old and being completely captivated, and also realizing at the same time that the materials and the basic understanding of this, I mean, fulcrums, you know, you can go back to Pythagoras, you know, the materials have been around and the basic understanding for 5,000 years. Why had someone not done this 5,000 years ago? Let's go further back, 10,000 years ago, if there was an advanced civilization. So, and there's certainly indications of that if you look at Egypt and the things that exist there. So I was captivated at a very early age with all of science and everything to do with the natural world and science. But something about capturing sound was just so incredibly clever. Edison's invention was so incredibly clever, and I wanted to be an inventor. And when I was 3 or 4 years old. So.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's very interesting. Okay, well, let's go to a question from one of the members. Now that Bang & Olufsen has decided that they've found 95 of their old Series 4000 turntables, which for those of you who aren't really familiar with it, it tracks straight across the record with a laser reader. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but
It's not laser.
Not laser.
not laser, optical. No?
It's not optical.
Not either.
Okay.
Either of those, yeah. Still mechanical.
All right, I'm going to stop there because I'm screwing it up. But tell us what you're going to do or what part you may have in this restoration project.
Sure. They had approached us a while back and told us they were going to re-engineer or repair, restore a number of these tables, and asked us if we could produce cartridges for them. So they asked us not to obviously go public about it until they made a formal release, which they've done, of course. So we are the ones who make the cartridges for them. In the announcements, they don't mention our name, but they do call the cartridge the SMMC20CL, indicating, you know, a Soundsmith cartridge. I worked on those tables when they were first introduced in 1970. And it was a very clever design. My company has serviced them and modified them for now it's 50 years. The two arms, one does have a light source and it is an optical reader of sorts, but all it does is sense whether a record is present or what size the record is. So if it doesn't see a record in the beginning, it switches to 45 and it knows to drop the arm in the right place.
Oh, well, how would you describe that technology? It's kind of went away. So was it really superior in a lot of ways, or did it have its own downfall?
Not really. It was, most people, most audiophiles look down their nose a bit at B&O with some justification. They might think, you have to lie down, pup. You lie down. You might think that, or some think that B&O, their primary focus was aesthetic. And I think that's true to a degree. But I think what only some audiophiles recognized was that every audio company, or a lot of them, have a moment of genius, and B&O's was their cartridge design. The tangential system, the 4000 series table, was a very advanced table for its era. And the cartridges were incredibly good, especially their top cartridges. So it was an extremely good turntable. How does it compare to a tangential system made today, a high-end tangential system? Probably doesn't compare that favorably to, something like an air-bearing tangential arm, but then again, you're talking a lot more money. For what it was in its day with the top-of-the-line CL cartridge, it was a phenomenal turntable. So I think what they've done is they brought it back to kind of wave their flag a bit, which I think is wonderful. And I think people that own them will enjoy owning them. It's like owning an old car, it's like you go out and you buy a 1970 Corvette and you kind of stand in the garage and stare at it for a while. It makes you feel good.
Right. I think I heard a price of $12,000.
11, yeah, it's 11 or something.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe you get a cartridge too, right?
Yeah, the cartridge comes with it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if they only have 95 to sell, I don't think they'll probably have too much trouble. There's got to be enough people that are going to want those.
Yeah, it does come with a built-in RAAA preamp, which is not necessarily a mistake, but I'm not sure if it allows you to use your own. I have a feeling if it doesn't, we'll be approached by a number of people to modify them so that they can use their own preamps.
Yeah, I would think so. Well, is this going to lead to a reintroduction of the product? I guess is the big question. Or are they just having fun with 95 that they're redoing?
They certainly don't let us privy to that. Of course, they play their cards pretty close to the chest. So I don't know what any long-term plans are they have. They wouldn't certainly inform us. They're certainly glad that we're around. They stopped making cartridges in 1986. And we got the license in 1990. So we've been making the cartridges for over 20 years. I'm sorry, almost, good Lord, it's 30 years. They have sent us letters over the years of congratulations that we hit better than 6 Sigma in terms of quality, which, because they were producing cartridges in such huge volume, they couldn't hit, quite understandably. But they were very pleased that as a small company, we had extremely good quality across the line making their cartridges. And they were concerned about that for obvious reasons. It's their reputation. So I get it.
Sure. Well, one thing we should probably go over, tell us about your product line in general, because we touched on a lot of different areas, but I'm not really sure what people today could expect to buy from Soundsmith. So can we do that next?
Sure, I'm happy to. We obviously make a line of magnetic cartridges. They are based on the B&O moving iron principle. I'm a huge believer in that as a magnetic design. It has huge advantages over both moving magnet and moving coil. We do list a number of them on our website. Under our cartridge page, there's a single page called Why Fixed Coil Kicks Ass. So if anyone has a lot of interest in that, they can read all about that. I can do a share screen and show a picture of it, at least one critical part of it. But the product line primarily is a wide range of magnetic cartridges. Then, of course, we make a strain gauge cartridge, which I'm glad to talk about if people have interest in that. Plus, because I have a long-standing interest in loudspeaker design from being director of engineering at Bozak and having had the joy of working with Rudy Bozak for a long time, we have loudspeakers on Monarchs and Dragonflies. Plus, I built some custom speakers for folks over the years. Then I design and we manufacture power amplifiers. And of course, preamplifiers as well, phono preamps and system preamps. People generally know me for my cartridge designs, but don't realize that I've been designing loudspeakers and electronics over the last 50 years as well.
Wow.
Didn't know that. Wow.
Okay. Well, let me just touch on one thing product wise. If you, whose speakers do you actually use in the speakers that you make for people?
Sure.
Is it kind of a custom business, or is there a line, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's pretty much custom. You know, it's interesting. If you go to, there are a bunch of show sites you can go to, and you can see my complete product line at various shows, because when we do shows, it's a complete Soundsmith room, except for the turntable and tone arm.
Oh.
So it's Soundsmith cartridges, preamps, loudspeakers, amplifiers. The speakers that use, so the speaker drivers are very carefully selected. I learned some really unique things when I worked at Bozak and made some interesting discoveries. And a lot of discoveries in science in general are accidental. Some of the most important discoveries I made at Bozak were accidental. I discovered a very unique method of measuring a loudspeaker, which corresponded exactly to the listening experience. And it allowed you to design and tune a loudspeaker in a very unique method. And I showed the technical results to Rudy Bozak. He became very animated at the time. He said nobody had ever run into this. And I discovered it quite accidentally. He came over to the lab and I showed him the results and we played with it a little, and he was pretty stunned. He said I needed to write a paper on it. I said, I'm working 14, 16 hours a day here. And I said, would you write it with me? And he said he would, but we never got the chance to. But I've used the principles of my discoveries there to design loudspeakers over the years. And the two stand mount speakers that I, sometimes sell and we produce at Soundsmith are based on that principle. People who ask me, why don't, the speakers are phenomenal. If you read the reviews of our showrooms, like the Munich shows and other shows in the States, people are always stunned at the sound in our room coming out of these very small stand mount speakers, and they don't quite understand how we can achieve that. And people are, surprised, I think, that we don't sell more speakers. Speakers are a really hard sell, and we don't have the capability to market loudspeakers against the competition, no matter how good they are. We sell them when people come into our sound room at Soundsmith and they listen to the system and they're blown away, and they just say, I've got to have those speakers. And that's typically when we'll sell them.
Peter, what would they cost, that stand mount? I take it it's a two-way?
It's a two-way, yeah. The larger ones, the Monarch, are about 8 or 9K. The smaller ones are 6.
Okay. Is it a ribbon combo, or what kind of product are you putting in there?
No, at the high end is a soft dome. It's a modified soft dome driver with a modified mid-low driver.
Okay, great. That's interesting.
I think the important thing to say about loudspeaker design is that I think very often the baby is thrown out with the bathwater and the forest is lost for the trees. When I was designing some speakers at Bozak, I designed a pair and Rudy came and he listened to them for 30 seconds and got up to leave. He didn't like them. And as he left the room, he turned and he looked at me and he said, when you're designing an electromagnetic transducer, he said, there are 10 things you'd like to do. You're only going to get to do 3 of them. You better pick the right things. And I've mentioned in other talks that I've given that, that was a very telling moment. He was a real teacher. He was able to distill lifetime of wisdom down into a sentence or two, which is the mark of a really good teacher. And I've taken that advice to heart. When you are designing something, you cannot get everything. So you've got to make a list of what's important and put those up at the top of the list and do those things, not do those things, or not, if there are 4 of them, you can't do 3 of them. You got to do all 4. And everything else on the list that falls underneath it, you tweak as best as you can. That's true of everything. It's true of cartridges, it's true of loudspeakers, it's true of amplifiers, preamp. So with the loudspeakers, what's important, I think, to really understand is that the human ear lives in the time domain, much more than the amplitude domain. And we're very sensitive in the time domain. It's how we determine direction. We obviously evolved like that, and being reasonably good hunters and for survival. But the human ear really lives in the time domain. And when there's a time problem with a loudspeaker, you can hear it. And they have more of their genetics in the camp of musical instruments than scientific instruments. If they were genetically more scientific instruments, they'd all sound the same. And I can tell you as a loudspeaker manufacturer in the past and now, just getting a pair of loudspeakers to sound like the last pair you made can be a challenge, much less one from one company sounding like another from another company. They are more musical instruments than scientific instruments, which is very dramatic proof of how sensitive the human ear is and how incorrectly a lot of loudspeakers are designed.
Wow, I never knew that. Well, you know, that kind of leads me into one of my more stock questions here. Did you spend time studying the human hearing process in order to assist you in your audio work?
Yes and no, not formally, of course, but I certainly have always read scientific journals my whole life, have been fascinated with hearing, and did a lot of experiments. And a lot of them I started doing at Bozak because we had an anechoic chamber there, which was great. And I was fascinated with the fact that a lot of things that you heard could not be measured. So that really relegates you to want to understand the anatomy of human hearing and the psychometry of human hearing. One experience I had at Bozak was I designed a loudspeaker and it sounded pretty good in the morning. I came back an hour later, tweaked the crossover, sounded good. Every hour I made changes. The end of the day, it sounded pretty good. The next day I came in, it was horrendous. And I went back to the original design, sounded okay. Every hour I made changes. I did that for 3 days. And at the end of 3 days, every morning it sounded terrible. I went to my logbook and I saw I was making the same changes every hour, every day. And I realized my hearing was changing hour to hour.
Oh,
And that was a real lesson for me that human hearing, at least mine, changes due to blood pressure, stress, blood sugar, you know, the list goes on and on. And I know emotionally when there's been, just for me, when there's been a personal loss of a friend or family member, I can't listen to music. It sounds terrible. It sounds thin and flat. And so our hearing is very changeable. It's very plastic. And, you know, people talk about electronics breaking in or equipment breaking in. Some of that is true, but it's this breaking in. I mean, those of us who are married can realize you can get used to almost anything. It just takes a little bit of time. But our hearing is very malleable. And I don't trust mine. If I design something or I listen to something and try and listen to it objectively, I will listen for weeks, and a good reviewer will do the same. And I will call other people in and ask them, what do they hear? And because it should be a group decision, although I have learned what to listen for, which is different than how well one hears. So it's a combination of trusting yourself and not trusting yourself and averaging what you hear.
very good. Well, I never thought about hearing being malleable, but it does make a lot of sense. And I feel like I've learned something important already. One of the other questions we had, which we've just touched on a little bit, and maybe you answered, but when you do have a new product coming out and before you finalize it, do you make the voicing decisions or is it done more by committee?
It's typically me, but I get corroboration from others. When I first designed the Hyperion and we went to the first show at Rocky Mountain with it, I had gone with engineers who'd really not heard it AB'd with the strain gauge. And at a show, it's very tough because you're really working your butt off and you're so exhausted, you can't hear anything. So fortunately, the people I was with were younger. And at the end of the first setup day, I had the Hyperion and the strain gauge there and 2 arms on one table, and I AB'd them. You know, I could switch back and forth. They were playing the same record with just a slight delay, 3-second delay, 3-4-second delay. And I said, gentlemen, what do you hear? And they gave me very good responses as to what they heard compared to the strain gauge, the Hyperion with the strain gauge. And it agreed with what I heard. So what I've learned is to trust the opinion of others. There are some people whose hearing is so radically different than mine. There's really nothing you can do or say. There's not that they're wrong and I'm right. They're not the majority, but there are people that are incredibly sensitive to certain ranges, so much so that what sounds normal to you at the top end would make their fillings fall out. So one has to be respectful, you know. We don't think the same, we don't see the same, we don't hear the same, we don't feel the same, except in generalities.
Very good. Let me ask you another question from a member is, can you explain your solution for addressing the anti-skate setup as it compares to other more complex methods?
Sure. So anti-skating, I'll try, this is a long subject. I'm going to try and make it short if I can. So for those who don't understand the requirement for anti-skating, it's because the head shell of the tone arm is cocked to give you correct overhang. And overhang is to get the proper null points on the record where the phase between left and right channels is correct. And before that point, it's not. From that point on, it's not. And from that point on, it's not. It's the best compromise for a pivoted arm. So you have to cock the head shell with respect to the arm. When you do that and you play a record, it's one of the main factors that causes a skating force, which is inward towards the spindle. So you have to create an anti-skating force so that the diamond has equal force in the groove wall, same pressure on each groove wall. You want that so you can trace the groove walls without mistracking. Anti-skating is very, very critical. Almost every test record in the world is wrong. Why? If you look at test records, they will have a track for anti-skating that's 80 or 90% modulated. The amount of anti-skating force that's required is a function of how much modulation there is in the groove. So they tell you, we'll play this track and adjust your anti-skating until there's no distortion on both channels, and you've got it right. Well, that's as wrong as could be. Anti-skating is a moving target. So why would you adjust it for a groove that's recorded at near full modulation? That would only be accurate if you were playing hip hop or heavy metal only. Then those would be good records to use for setting your anti-skating. So it's an imperfect situation. So how do you come up with a good solution? So my close friend, Frank Schroeder, great audio engineer and tone arm designer, did some very, very careful reverse engineering. Music is typically recorded on average so that about 95% of the time, it's at about 30 or 40% modulation level. So if you think about that being the fact, or the case rather, that means you want to have the anti-skating correct. That is equal force on each groove wall for 30 or 40% modulation. So Frank did the measurements very carefully, and what he realized was that the tip of a stylus, the actual bottom of the stylus, that radius is an industry standard, believe it or not. That's done so that it doesn't touch the bottom of the groove where dirt can accumulate. So if you take a radius or a curve and put it on a smooth record surface, smooth vinyl, you're going to have a certain frictional coefficient. So basically what he did was he adjusted the anti-skating for 30 or 40% modulation. Then he put it on a record, on the surface of the record, and he watched how the arm moved at a given tracking force. And what he found was that if he adjusted it so it slowly moved in towards the spindle, that equivocated to the correct anti-skating for a groove modulation of about 30 or 40%. It's a first order approximation for getting the anti-skating within the ballpark, and it works incredibly well. Having worked on tens of thousands of cartridges in my life, rebuilding cartridges, I can tell you that most cartridges come in with the outer facet completely worn compared to the inner one. And that's because people are applying too much anti-skating, or they're using these test records that say, hey, tweak it till you've got no distortion when you play this track, which results in way too much anti-skating. So the short story is, it was a method developed by Frank Schroeder. It's clever, because Frank is, and it works really well. It works with any stylus shape because you're dealing with the tip, which is a constant. And as you vary the tracking force, of course, you need more anti-skating. So tracking force doesn't matter. It's a technique that works any cartridge, any tracking force, any stylus shape for a first order approximation of getting the anti-skating correct.
So you're saying that the outer surface of the stylus would be worn more with too much anti-skating than the inner.
Correct.
I guess and it wouldn't be the inner surface being
No,
pulled.
the outer, the outer.
Why the outer rather than the inner?
Because anti-skating pushes the arm towards the outer edge of the record.
Okay. Okay, I got it. Yeah.
Ben, I think you came in a little bit later, but we asked everybody to mute initially, and we're going to go through the standard questions. And then if you have something you want to ask during, to put it in the chat, and we will have at the end a Q&A for that too.
I just had to jump on that for a second.
Oh, it's fine, it's fine. And you know, it's kind of sad because it's so easy to get the anti-skating right. And everyone I've given Schroeder's method to over the last, whatever it is, 15 years, every audiophile has come back and said, it sounds better. Well, you know, it should. Now, let me add one important point to that. So then you would say, well, wait a minute, aren't I going to be undercompensated when there's a loud moment, when there's crescendo? And the answer is, of course. So then you could say, well, doesn't that mean there's going to be, you know, too much force on the inner groove wall and not on the outer, so the stylus might bobble or chatter? And the answer is yes. So then you could say, well, why does it work? And the answer is, if your cartridge is designed correctly, even though you have less pressure momentarily on this wall, if it's a really well-designed cartridge, it'll still track a complex moment without losing it. But when you do it by that method, you get equal groove wall wear, you get equal stylus wear, and you get better performance over 95% of the time you're playing music.
Great. Peter, didn't you make a video that's available on YouTube that people can follow to see what your system is?
That's my dog.
Postman's here.
Azul.
Or John, maybe there's a link to a video you could post in our chat for everybody. Is there one?
Yeah. I'm sorry, did you say, I have done videos on how to align cartridges. And so I do have one that talks skating.
But not one on the anti-skate method?
Yeah, no, I do talk about that. I do have a video on YouTube that talks
Okay.
about the anti-skate and how to adjust it.
Yeah, I think people would like to see that. All right, so moving on from there.
Where can one get a blank? Where can one get a blank quickly?
There are certain records that are only pressed on one side. If you search the internet for what those recordings are, you will find them, but you don't necessarily need a blank record. All you need is a record that's sort of short, an LP that doesn't have, somebody's got one. Is that John? He's got a record up that only pressed on one side. But even a record that's short, all you do is you go over to the run-out groove and you cue it down between the run-out grooves. And for a moment, you'll be on the surface of the record, not in the groove, and you can watch how the tone arm behaves.
This is Johnny Winter's second winter. It's his actual second album. He only had material for 3 sides. So the second record is completely blank.
Oh, I've never seen that.
You can find it on, probably you can find a copy on Amazon.com, a used copy. It doesn't matter, you know, the condition of it, but this is the side 3. This is the side 4.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's move on to another question, more in the technical side. And you touched on this a little bit initially, Peter, but can you explain the benefits of the moving iron versus moving magnet for people in a term
Sure.
they can probably follow, and then maybe take that to the next level of how that compares to moving coil, and then strain cartridge.
Sure. So the thing that's important to realize is that with a photo cartridge, you obviously have a cantilever and the diamond down here. And back here, you have a mass. And the whole design of a cartridge is to move this mass, the stylus is to move this mass to generate a voltage. And this mass is the enemy. That's the important thing. So what you have is the tail trying to wag the dog, and in fact, it does wag the dog, and that's bad. Because what you wind up doing is storing mechanical energy in the form of inertia in this moving mass. So having this moving mass inside of the cartridge, the generator, it's really bad because you're asking to move this up to 20,000 times a second. You're asking it to start instantly and stop instantly. It can't do that. There are damping materials used, but basically what happens is it rings and it sends energy back down the cantilever. And a lot of the lectures I've given go into detail about this. But when you send energy back down this way, very bad. You're asking the stylus, a low mass, getting a lot of energy from, by the way, not only the reflected energy, but from the resonant energy, the natural resonance of the cartridge. You're asking that diamond to get rid of the energy and it can't, to move the record. It can't do it. So the only choice it has is to leave the groove wall and bang its way down the groove, sampling the groove. People don't want to think about that, but that's a huge problem with analog. And so that's why the better the cartridge design you do requires lowering this mass. It has all sorts of benefits. It's like a sports car. You reduce the mass in order to make it handle better. It's an inertial problem. So along with mechanical resonance problems. So moving magnets typically had a fairly large magnet. Moving coil systems have a fairly large coil. The beauty of the moving iron system we do is that the moving mass is 5 to 8 times lower than the best moving coil. So I'm going to do a share screen here for those who've not seen this. And I'm going to try to pull up an image I have. There we go. Can everybody see this?
It's not showing up for me. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Okay. So here what you have is one of the smallest moving coil designs. Maybe I can enlarge this a little bit. No, not easily. I'm sorry. Oh, well, I can a bit. Hold on. Or not. Oh, there it goes. All right. So what you have here is this is one of the smallest moving coil armatures made. And this is our largest moving iron design. And you can, and this of course is an iron core with wire wrapped around it. So here you can actually see this is actually 5 times lower in mass. They're both iron than this. And we go down to 8 times lower. And the beauty of that is there's much, much lower stored energy. Don't worry about the cantilever here that's used. That's irrelevant. We're just looking at the moving system inside the cartridge. And that's awfully critical. Getting rid of as much of that mass results in the stylus statistically staying in much, much better statistical contact with the groove wall. It's a sampling issue, just like digital. The sampling with digital is constant, of course, depending on the digital system. But with analog, the sampling is variable, depending on how much mass there is, how much groove modulation there is, the frequency, the amplitude. It's constantly varying. But the stylus is not staying in intimate contact with the groove wall. It's like a sports car driving down a cobblestone road. That tire is not tracing every stone. Well, with analog, you want to trace every stone. And the way you approach that is by getting rid of as much of this moving mass inside the cartridge as possible. Our cartridges do that. And that's why one of the important reasons they're dramatically different from the rest of the field. The other thing is moving coils have a lot of failure issues. They have a lot of damage issues, rotational azimuth issues. The list goes on and on. I've got them on my website. It's on that page called Why Fixed Coil Kicks Ass. You can look at it. But it's one of the main reasons I don't build moving coil cartridges. I've repaired tens of thousands of them over 50 years, but I don't like them. And of course, there's wire breakage, you know, like bending a coat hanger back and forth, wire hardening, bink, moving coil, not a fan. The strain gauge, all this mass that's here, no matter how small, the strain gauge, this mass is completely gone. And it uses the energy that holds the cantilever, it picks it up with 2 semiconductor elements. So the energy that's normally lost in the suspension of a cartridge is picked up by 2 strain gauge elements. So the moving mass is literally just the cantilever and stylus, and it allows us to damp the energy at this end of the cantilever really well, so there's almost no reflected energy. The result is almost no stylus jitter at all. The resonant frequency for every cartridge, moving coils are typically between 30 and 50 kilohertz. Ours are between 50 and 90. Strain gauge is up at 130. It's almost unmeasurable. And as proof that there's almost no stylus jitter, we can play a lacquer. This is a record cut on a Neumann lathe. They're usually playable about 3 to 5 times with a magnetic cartridge before they get noisy. All the high frequencies are stripped. I have lacquers I've played 150, 200 times with the strain gauge with 0 damage. If you read our website, Tam Henderson, who owns Reference Recordings, he uses the strain gauge for many reasons. One, of course, is the extreme accuracy, but he uses because he has to listen to lacquers, and sometimes repeatedly, and doesn't want to damage them. So that's empirical proof of the lack of jitter and the extreme accuracy in the strain gauge. I've actually gotten a stylus back from one owner that had 6,000 hours on it, and I chastised him a little for going over the limit. And when he sent it back, it looked like it had about 100 or 150 hours on it, and I didn't rebuild it. I said,
Oh,
interesting.
so do
So
they
it's-
have much longer life?
I can't advertise it, but if you think about it, if you drive your car down the road and you bang off the curb, those tires aren't going to last very long. And I think that's a reasonable analogy to thinking about a stylus not jittering so much. When you jitter, the moments that you hit, there's extreme force for that period of time. And that causes more wear than just smoothly riding down.
What would the retail be, say, for the 2 products that I guess you're talking about, which would be the strain gauge versus the moving iron, for those who aren't familiar?
For the top of the line moving iron, that's our Hyperion. That uses a cactus cantilever, something that we invented and developed. And that cartridge sells for $8K, $79.99. Still has an unusual warranty. We're not going to do it forever. We offer that with a 10-year warranty against stylus wear. Free retipping. That won't happen forever, but we're still marketing it as such. The strain gauge system of course, requires a specialized preamp. It doesn't use an RIAA preamp. So that's sold as a cartridge and system and preamp system. That goes for $8,600, so about $600 more. Interestingly, the Styli are user replaceable. It's the only high-end cartridge in the world with user replaceable Styli. They are tuned for the cartridge because it is not a magnetic cartridge, it's a display. So it's far, far more sensitive than a magnetic. So the Styli have to be made, the assemblies have to be made with great accuracy, tuned for each cartridge. But if you order multiple Styli with them, they are user replaceable very quickly.
And the moving iron?
They come back and we retip. Now, we're also the only company that offers rebuilding of all of our cartridges for 20% or less. The Hyperion, if you break it, it's 11% to get it rebuilt. And we're the only company that does that. You know, we really feel we're not just going to stand behind our products, we're going to stand behind our customers.
Yeah.
I find it incredible that you can buy a high-end cartridge and the company won't rebuild it.
Yeah. Well, that is a little hard to understand. Okay. Well, that gives us a sort of a quick rundown on the different cartridges that you're making, and also where we can go learn more about them if we would like to. Something that's near and dear to the hearts of everybody. You do something with vintage audio gear. Tell us about that, if you don't mind.
Me too. I've serviced equipment my whole life and trained a lot of people to do it. We love to do it. That division of our company is not near the size that, of course, that it used to be years ago. But as you read in the introduction that I'd written about my experience in the industry, one of the best ways of learning engineering is to look at the forensics of failure. It's a great way to learn engineering. And I've used it to teach audio and engineering for 50 years. So we still service vintage audio. We're very careful about the stuff we work on. We won't work on something somebody else has prodded around in because, well, a list of reasons is long. And we work on into, we have a huge database. We've got a 50-year database of all the engineers that I've trained, so that when a particular piece of equipment comes in, we can look at everything that commonly fails. Failures are almost always, I shouldn't say almost always, I would say somewhere between 70 and 80% of failures are common failures, because anything made by man is a chain, and some links are weaker than others. So there are always components that are going to wear out before others. And very often it's the same component or components. So what we do when we restore a classic piece, we look up our database, every part that's known to fail on a given model, automatically replaced. Circuitry that's known to fail because it's been poorly designed, or mechanisms, automatically re-engineered. We have a lot of notes on how we've done that. So what we enjoy doing is taking a classic piece and rendering it into a re-engineered piece. It's not just working, but a piece where the weak links have been replaced, so that you wind up with a classic piece that should give you a ton of extended service and great performance. And it's a joy to do that. It's challenging, but it's a real joy to do that. I know, you know, it's funny how the little things you do, you kind of remember real well. I have a young engineer working for me now. He's done a couple of YouTubes, and we had a CD player, a high-end one that we were repairing, and the front buttons, the hinge buttons, and their little stem on the back to hit the little switch on the circuit board, you know, weren't very accurate, the alignment of everything, so they'd slip off the switches and wouldn't activate. And I said, how would you fix that? And he was puzzled for a while. And I went and got a roll of fish paper, which is like a hard gray oak tag. It's used for electrical insulation. It's like a thin cardboard. I said, cut some strips of that and lock it in behind the plastic front. So when you push on the front switch, it'll have a general area to depress upon, and it'll always depress that switch. You don't have to worry about it slipping off. And he came back to me a year later and he said, that was one of the cleverest things we did to repair something or modify something. And I said, sometimes it's something elegantly simple that will never break, that you modify, and you know that problem is gone forever. So those are the kinds of things we like to do. We like to think and to create elegant solutions for modifying classic gear, as well as obviously look at our database, our extensive database.
So you're talking about gear as in turntables, receivers?
Everything. I've worked on everything that's got a plug on it, and a lot of stuff that doesn't have a plug on it.
Wow. Well, why doesn't the auto industry have something like that, where they keep a database of the things most commonly going wrong? That's always frustrated me, because you go in and you go, well, I've got this problem now. You must have seen it 100 times, and they'll always say, no, never seen it before.
Well, I think that's not true. I think they do have a database, but it's not in their best interest to say, yeah, we got a list of everything that fails on this car. You know, I've got a car here, an old BMW that runs the battery down. And the other day I went online and I found, yeah, the water builds up in the channels and it rusts the Bluetooth module. Go in the back and unplug it. So fortunately you can go on YouTube and sometimes you can get answers, but there's a lot of